Hello, I'm Malcolm Haslett.
And I'm Janice Baker. He graduated from Marion High School with a scholarship to attend the Royal Military College, Duntroon, in 1971.
He completed a Bachelor of Arts while at Duntroon.
Master of Arts in History from the University of New South Wales in 1985, with a focus on Australia's relations with the United States of America and Southeast Asia.
He graduated from Army Command and Staff College in 1988 with a graduate diploma in Management Studies.
He has an advanced Master of Business Administration from the University of Adelaide in 2002, while serving as a Member of Parliament.
And in 1999 he was awarded the Barron Partners Prize in Strategic Management. Who is he? He's our special guest.
It's our special
Here's Martin Hamilton-Smith next
on Our Time.
There's nothing much we can say except...
Well, that was a huge introduction, wasn't it?
Welcome, Martin.
Yes.
It's wonderful to be with you.
It is, of course, but it's wonderful for you to be here because, you know, we've invited a lot of people who have had a life spent in politics onto the program, and I think they're afraid of us.
Well, why would they be afraid?
Exactly. Do you know, it's a great shame though, Martin, because we don't really get to know many of the people who've been politicians, unfortunately, until afterwards. So let's put you under the microscope and find out your background. Where did you start, Martin? A baby, I guess.
Well, I grew up here in Adelaide, in the foothills of Adelaide, fifth generation Australian. Big family, 6 children. My mother says that was before the pill. So the families were larger before the pill, for those who can remember that time.
Yes.
Went to a wonderful public education system, graduated from Marion High School, won a scholarship to go to the Royal Military College, Duntroon.
Was that a family thing?
Well, my grandfather had been a rat of Tobruk and fought in New Guinea. He had a big influence on me. So there was, both my grandfathers fought, one in World War I, one in World War II, so there was a bit of a story there. But in those days, late 60s, early 70s, you either went and worked for the bank, went into law, worked for the public service, joined the army. You had to have a job. Yes. There was no thought of staying at home
or just have
and
a gap
living with mum and dad. At the end of high school, you had to get a job, and your parents were ready to put you out the front door.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, and I chose the army as a career, and I thought it would be adventurous. I thought it offered a university education, which in those days before the introduction of free university education was a big encouragement. And I thought I'd meet some great people, and I did. And most importantly, I'd have an opportunity to serve my country. The Vietnam War was raging. These were tumultuous times, the late 60s, early 70s. People had strong minds and strong convictions, and I was one of them. And I decided that I wanted to serve my nation in uniform, and I had a great 24 years doing just that.
Well, you ended up in Egypt.
That's where the military story ended, yes, but on that journey, I went to serve as a young platoon commander in an infantry battalion in Brisbane, and was deployed on operations in Malaysia, finished up in the Special Air Service Regiment, which was a tough gig, commanding our first counter-terrorist force in 1980. When terrorism really hit the world stage, and then commanded a commando company and eventually the commando regiment, and then commanded our peacekeepers in the Sinai in Egypt on the border with Israel and Egypt in 1993. I was the Assistant Chief of Staff of the whole force, which was 3,200 people, 11 nations, and the Australian Contingent Commander at the age of 39. And it was great to be in the middle of the Middle East, wrestling and grappling with those tumultuous issues that are front of mind in all matters Middle East.
Did you get to see much of the country?
Yes, I did.
Was it also focused?
I travelled extensively through the Middle East, but particularly Egypt and Israel, Palestine, into Jordan, the southern borders of Lebanon. So I had an opportunity to get to know the Bedouin, to get to know a little bit about the culture of the region. It's very divided and very diverse, and the history of the region is a mess. And in my time in the army, my special field was guerrilla warfare. I studied Lawrence of Arabia in detail, and of course this was the area where Lawrence
Isn't that amazing?
led the Bedouin during World War
You didn't
One.
wear the frock though, did you?
Well, you know, from time to time you dress up in life.
Well, I guess you have to. There would have to be certain situations.
I think my dressing up as Lawrence of Arabia extends to a fancy dress party night in Sydney.
Yeah, but you have the
some
right
years
to
later.
do that. But you have the right to do that. Having served there.
When I was there, we had a job to do. We had 3 battalions guarding the border as a result of the Camp David Accords. It really was a job about keeping the Israeli army and the Egyptian army apart. And that peace underpins the peace of the whole region.
Right.
And if it fails, there'll be another major war in the Middle East. So it's a very important work that the multinational force and observers
And how do you feel now about what's happening in that area of the world? Is it
Upset.
frustrating that it never
Yes.
resolved itself before?
Well, I'm encouraged actually by recent developments. I think, love him or hate him, President Trump is making some bold steps to get things moving. Some people will find that a little confronting. Others will welcome it. You know, there's a legion of people in the Middle East who've made their careers out of there not being peace in the Middle East.
Yes.
The United Nations, there's all these Quangos and international organisations. What on earth would they do with themselves if there was peace in the Middle East? You know, at some point somebody needs to smash some heads together and bring some common sense to the table. Israel is remaining in the region. It's not going anywhere, and anyone who thinks that they would not recognise the state of Israel is not going to win the argument. But similarly, the Palestinian people and other countries in the region have real and legitimate concerns that need to be addressed. And the only people that can solve it are the people who live there, and all of we who live somewhere else can help but not solve the problem. And so I think some heads do need to be smashed together over there to get people to the table.
So do you think the Trump way of looking at the way he does business, so to speak, because it's not the way that politics are usually played, is it? Do you think his effect will sort of make people thinking slightly differently, not playing the game?
Look, sometimes I cringe when I see some of the international initiatives that President Trump undertakes, and then the next moment I'm thinking, isn't that great? You know, he's got the Korean problem to the negotiating table by making some bold steps that would have upset a lot of diplomats and a lot of public servants and a lot of so-called experts on the Korean issue, again, who built careers around there not being peace in the region. Same in the Middle East. Now, it's dangerous brinkmanship, but if it delivers peace,
isn't it?
If it delivers peace, it will have been worth it. And you know, when you look back at history, peace has often been put together by bold steps that are outside the square. And I think that's what he's doing. And look, it's dangerous stuff. Let's see if it works.
Well, for a businessman, I mean, he is a businessman, not a politician, to think that he's actually...
He doesn't seem to mind who he offends.
No.
Well,
That's probably part of it.
well, that's right. And as I said, love him or hate him. But, you know, there is in politics, in the United States, in Australia, everywhere, people who like things to work the way they've always worked. They're very comfortable year after year with the whole charade. It's not just the politicians, by the way, it's the public servants, it's the media themselves who love the game. And when somebody comes along and rattles the cage and wants to play the game outside the rules, a lot of people don't like it.
But the world has really changed the rules with the internet, particularly in the last 20 years, and particularly with things like Facebook, as we've recently talked about on the program. The reality is that things are changing and everyone has to change with them, no matter what station in life you are.
Yeah, well, that's correct. And, you know, the internet has particularly affected the way the media works and operates and the way we receive information.
Well, they're competing with it in real terms.
Well, indeed. And
something we often forget, because we hear the 3-second bites in the news services from people like yourself, and think, but what do they really think?
Well, that's an interesting point. You see, the old model of communication between the political class and the people is that the politicians, whether they're in government or opposition, hold a press conference, put out a message and give it to the mainstream media. The mainstream media then sit there with their pencil in hand and determine how they will interpret what they've heard, and they then tell the people what they want the people to hear from the politicians. It's not often what the politicians said. Sometimes they've added some spin of their own. That's the old model. The new model, and again Trump's pioneering this to some extent, is to take his message directly to the people. Now he's using Twitter.
Yeah.
It's a little bit rough and ready, but I think we are heading into a world where increasingly you will see governments and oppositions take their media message directly to people using social media and using other means, and the mainstream media won't like it one little bit because it will threaten established arrangements. And one of the frustrating things about being a minister in particular and a politician is that your 2-minute interview gets broken down into a 5-second news grab.
Yes.
And the journalist decides, no matter how experienced or inexperienced that journalist is, what spin they want to put on that and what they'll put to air. And often it's not what the minister wanted put to air.
Well, I think it's becoming a serious issue because the general public just really don't know. We're just being fed these little bits and pieces. We're talking with Martin Hamilton-Smith. Martin, obviously you left the army. Was that because you're just too old?
Well, I was 40. You get one life. It's not a rehearsal. You have to use those years very carefully. It was 1993. Peace was breaking out all over the world, if I can put it that way, in 1993. I'd commanded peacekeepers in Egypt. It looked to me as though a future in Canberra commanding a desk was looming. Had I known that Timor, Iraq, Afghanistan, all those challenges were coming, I might have felt it was my duty to stay. But I didn't
when you
see
say
those
Canberra, you don't mean in Canberra politics, you mean in Canberra?
I mean in the bureaucracy of Canberra, being a peacetime general.
Yes.
And that didn't appeal to me. So I got out and went into business for a while.
Came back home to work with your mum.
Ironically, into the family business, which was building and operating childcare centres.
Now, is it true that your mum actually started the
She set up the first private childcare centre in South Australia and one of the first in Australia. And look, it's interesting.
Good old Barbara.
It's interesting going from Army Special Forces to running childcare centres.
I don't know.
It's a different skill set. I went from an all-male
Yes.
workforce to a predominantly female workforce as the proprietor of the business. It was a military workforce to a civilian workforce, which required different roles, and it was public sector to private sector. So I learned a lot.
Just hang
Very
on, because
quickly, I would imagine.
Very quickly.
We've got a shot of you, first of all, when you were in the forces, which we should have a look at when you were a young man. Look at you there. How
Martin,
old
you
were
haven't
then?
changed.
My.
Yeah, it would change.
How old were you then?
I would say around about 30.
And we actually do have another shot of you in front of, what's that?
That's an Italian jet trainer.
Were you flying in that?
I was co-piloting that one.
Was that amazing?
It was amazing. A mate of mine flies it, and it was only a few years ago. It was only 3 years ago. So, look.
So you haven't lost the taste.
But look, my philosophy of life is pretty straightforward. It isn't a rehearsal. You get one go at it. Squeeze as much into it as you can. There's plenty of time. You're dead a long time. And you're certainly aged and at the back end of your life for a very long time.
Well, we've been talking to a psychic. That may not be the case.
Well, you don't want to be looking back saying, I wish I'd done this, I wish I'd done that.
That's
I
right,
squeezed everything.
But you
into
might
it.
get it next time, you never know.
Yeah.
So you were looking after your business interests and the childcare centres, and then you thought, gee, politics seems to be the next great adventure.
Well, actually, there was a missing link while I was in business. It was financially rewarding, and I did enjoy the cut and thrust of business, but I missed the sense of national service and purpose that went with being in the army. I felt I was serving my country. I'd always been interested in politics. I saw it as an opportunity to serve the country again. I didn't go into it because I love politics or I love political parties or the politics of politics, which some politicians seem to love. I went into it because I wanted to get in there, roll my sleeves up and try and make some changes and do some good things.
Do you think every politician starts with that incentive, or is there sort of an old whatever club, an old politician family club?
I think most of them start with high intentions. I think about a third of the politicians I met through my career were top flight people, the best of the best and as good as you'll find anywhere in life.
Because they still had the focus of the public in mind?
Yes, and they were talented, capable people. About another third, I think, were just there, for the beer and Skittles. And then there's about a third in the middle that probably swing back and forwards. But most people are well-intended, regardless of their political party. And what I learnt quickly, of course, is that the party politics has permeated through the political process almost like a cancer. And whilst you need it, and it does some good things, the party politics can also do quite a lot of damage, particularly when the parties put their own self-interest and their own survival and their own objects ahead of the nation's. And I've seen plenty of that. So I've had a pretty interesting 21 years in politics.
Well, so you had a very interesting time more recently when you did probably the unthinkable for most politicians. And I don't know that I've ever heard, I don't think anyone's really ever given you an opportunity to explain that. So here's your chance.
Well, what happened was I joined the Liberal Party because I felt that was the party that most accurately reflected my value set, although it was a bit hard to pin down those values because there isn't really a platform. I was a Liberal member for the best part of 16 years. I was a minister in my first term for tourism and innovation. I eventually led the Liberal Party in South Australia. That was difficult because I wasn't in a faction. I chose early not to join a faction. It made it very, very tough to get on.
Sorry, just explain what a faction actually is.
A faction,
we hear these words, but they're often not explained very well.
Well, a faction is a group of like-minded people within a party who decided to gang up together. They could be drinking buddies, they could be people convinced to a particular policy. All the farmers might get together, all the teachers and nurses might get together.
Yeah.
For one reason or another they gang together.
But remembering that every politician has come from a specific walk of life.
Correct.
And that's what's driven them into politics anyway.
Sometimes they're from the left, sometimes they're from the right. But more often than not, people are looking to advance themselves personally through being part of a faction, and there's safety in numbers. So sometimes it's a case of drinking buddies thinking, well, Malcolm over there's got a bit more talent than me, so maybe if I've got these 5 people over here voting for me, I can jump ahead of Malcolm. All these sorts of things go on. Now,
so which side are you going for?
they would. So I learned a lot about factions, but I refused to join one. So
so you're almost an independent right from the beginning,
well,
so to speak.
In a sense. But I
Do you know, your mum told me years ago, she said the only way to get what you really need in the future is to work with both sides of politics.
Correct.
And get each side to help you in any way possible, because it doesn't matter who you talk to and who makes the move as long as you get what you're intending.
Well, Malcolm, you're dead right. I took the view from day one that I was there to serve the nation, my state and my local community.
Was that your army training?
Probably, partly. I defined myself more by that 24 years in the army than by politics, and I came into it as a mature person. I worry for the guys and women that go into it very young because it becomes their baseline. But I'm very clear on why I was there, and it wasn't to serve any political party or any faction. It was to serve the country. And unfortunately, I joined a party that was very divided, and there'd been a premier betrayed, Premier Brown, another Premier let down badly, Premier Olsen. It was factionally riven. The party was very divided.
So you don't hear about this, do you?
No,
we
exactly
don't,
right.
Well, at
we
the
don't
time,
know.
this was all in the paper, but
Yeah,
it's been
but,
a very
but with the
divided
spin,
party.
Martin.
Yeah.
Always with the spin,
Yeah.
as you were saying.
Yeah, and in the end, after 16 years of this mayhem, it was almost like herding cats. At one point, I thought I'll leave. Then I thought, no, I've got a responsibility to try and fix it. So I banged a few heads together, and as I said, finished up being the leader. But it was just a group at that particular time that didn't want to be led and didn't want to get on with the job. And I think a group that made some very bad decisions. Anyway, in the end, I decided to leave the party and become an independent. And I was offered an opportunity to be a minister in the Wetherill Labor government. I said I'd be happy to do that, provided they understood that I was a Conservative, a Liberal, and I'd be arguing a Conservative Liberal view within a Labor. And my view was that I'd be better off to try and make them a better government than to sit on the backbench and throw stones from the sidelines.
Because
So-
it's a bit pointless, really, isn't it? You're really just there to argue.
Well, precisely. And I had 4 years as the Minister for Investment, Trade, Defence Industries, to fight to keep the submarines and the frigate work in Australia and South Australia.
You know, that's
to
a
do
huge
some good
legacy
things.
to have left. The fact that you've left that legacy, that now Adelaide has that submarine contract. And sorry, Martin, but another thing on top of that, as we said a week ago, you're also responsible for the reinvigoration of the River Torrens area, where right in the heart of the city. Just go down that path for a tick. How far down the river did you envisage things happening?
All the way to the brewery. But where it started, Malcolm, was I was leader of the Liberal Party and leader of the opposition, and I was challenged with a simple proposition: how do you elbow your way into the room? I had to come up with a bold idea, and that bold idea was to move football back into the city, away from West Lakes, and to build a new city stadium that brought football back into the city. And Adelaide Oval was an option, but cricket told me and footy told me they'd never work together. So I proposed a separate stadium. I wanted to leave the hospital where it was and do it slightly differently and light up that entire River Torrens precinct, bring the entertainment centre up, renew the festival centre, which has now been done, renew the convention centre and extend it, which has now been done, and make the river the centre of Adelaide. Now, ironically, Jay Wetherill and the Labor government were the ones that delivered on most of that, and we finished up with Adelaide Oval. But to champion that from opposition, to then have an opportunity to fight for the submarines, to rebuild our investment and trade agenda, I think I can look back on 21 years feeling that I've accomplished something for my country, my state, my local community. And that's why I went into it in the first place. Now, I put a few noses out of joint, but I'm not so fussed about that.
If you believe in something, though, you sort of have to. And just hold that thought. We'll be back with Martin in just a moment.
We've learned so much about you, Martin, but there's probably still a lot more that we don't know. Where are we going from here? What can we talk about now?
Yes,
You've covered so much of your life.
Well, I think democracy around the world's facing some challenges. We're seeing that in Europe with Brexit and a move to the right, in America with Trump, and here in Australia as well. With Canberra's been like a revolving door of changing prime ministers. I think we need to stop, take a deep breath and start to do what's right for the country instead of this combative, partisan brawl, barroom brawl that we've seen for the last 10 years or so.
It's a competition, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it's
become a competition.
Well, it's not just the politicians. The media love it. It's like the footy on the weekend.
That's what I mean.
They want Team A over there in their Guernsey and Team B over the other side of the paddock.
Blood in the
Guernsey,
middle.
And blood in the middle. And it makes for good television and good media. And the politicians, I think we need to break that paradigm apart and start asking ourselves how we can work together to deliver a better future for our children and our grandchildren. Give a bit of credit where credit's due, start working together a little more and have a battle of ideas. Let's have a contest over who can run the fastest, not who can trip the other side up.
Yes, but it's also too, Martin, that who's going to listen? I mean, How do you make your voice heard?
Well, therein is an important part of the question and the answer. People need to value their democracy and demand better.
Absolutely.
If we don't, we'll lose it.
We're so lucky, particularly in this country. We are so lucky.
Yeah.
No wars in the country itself. We've got all the food in the world that we want. It's just fantastic. And Martin, we want to thank you so much for spending this time with us. Sadly, we have to go. We could talk for hours and hours. Janice?
Yes.
Say goodbye.
Yes, goodbye. Take care.
Until next time, keep yourself nice till then.